And yeah, I just need to quickly share my screen. So, hi everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. And we really do have a very exciting webinar lined up for you. With us, I'm just going to do a brief introduction of our speakers. The way the session will work is we'll have two presentations, first by Dr. Andrew Hill and the second by Mitchell Warren. And Andrew's presentation will focus on affordability, Lenacapavir's affordability, making Lenacapavir more affordable to actually realize its potential. And Mitchell, who's executive director of AVAC, will talk a bit more about the purpose trials. And you may have seen in the summer, it's been a summer of what I want to say announcements around these trials. So the first one was around the Purpose 1 trial, and recently there was an announcement around the Purpose 2 trial. And then after we have, we're so happy to have Brooke Baker, who some of you may know already from the NGO delegation. He's a member of the NGO delegation to the board of Unity. So very happy to have him. And Yvette Raphael, who is an executive director for treatment access based in Southern Africa. I'm just going to go quickly and just say a little bit about our speakers now. Hope you can see my screen. Can you? Yeah. Okay, so Andrew Hill is a senior professor of pharmacology at Liverpool University, and his work focuses on antiretroviral treatment for developing countries. He's an advisor to several multilateral agencies, GHIs, and leads work designing clinical trials. Then we have our second speaker is Yvette Raphael, who is the executive director for Advocates for Prevention in Africa. And she's a member of the African Women's Prevention Community Accountability Board and serves on the board of trustees for the MTV Staying Alive Foundation. And she also co-founded the Tashawan Care Center for People Living with HIV. We have Brooke Baker, who is, as I said, Brooke is probably known a lot to much of you, are part of the NGO delegation and its mailing list. Has a very illustrious career as a professor emeritus at from Northeastern University. He's worked with Health Gap, and he's advised government and GHIs, and we're very pleased to have Brooke with us today. And finally, we have Mitchell Warren, who is no stranger to you as well. And Mitchell is the executive director for AVAC and has been a treatment advocate for over 30 years. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and hand over to our first presenter, and that will be you, Andrew. Go ahead.
Okay, can everybody see the slides? Yeah. Okay, so let's just start off with, just going to make sure this advances. So Lenacapavir, as I'm sure you know, is a 6-month injection. Somebody just mute their.
I'm sorry, if you need to mute yourself when you're not speaking, please.
Yeah. So Lenacapavir has shown these amazing results in the Purpose 1 study, where before the trial started, there was a high background rate of HIV acquisition, and among the women given either TDF or TAF, FTC, there were 55 HIV infections, but among the people given Lenacapavir, there were none. Now, this is a 6-monthly injection, which provides a strong level of protection against HIV. I think this is the closest we've ever been to an HIV vaccine, to have a a treatment that can be given every 6 months, giving this level of protection. Also, in the last week, we saw the results from the equivalent Purpose 2 study in MSM, where again, there was a significant benefit of lenacapavir over tenofovir in preventing HIV, and also a much lower rate of HIV acquisition compared to the background rate seen before the study. Now, if we think about the implications just of Purpose 1, globally, around half of all new HIV acquisitions are among women and girls. In sub-Saharan Africa, adolescent girls and young women accounted for more than 77% of new HIV acquisitions, and they're 3 times as likely to acquire HIV than their male peers. So this 6-monthly dosing benefit offers a new option for HIV prevention, which is a lot more confidential, a lot more discreet. It can be given without the knowledge of people's partners, of their families, their friends. It could be given in line with a schedule for contraception, depot contraception. It could be provided in the same clinics as contraception. And it's possible to improve adherence because people then don't need to take the daily pills. And it's just been a general feature of using tenofovir in young women and adolescents that the adherence has not been optimal. So it's possible to use it covertly. Now, in my team, over the last 15 years, we've been looking at how much drugs cost to make. Now, the elephant in the room with lenacapavir is that the current US price is $40,000 per person per year. We see this price in Europe, in Australia, and there's no reduction from it. We're stuck with this price. Now, that is clearly unaffordable. If we're going to treat millions of people with lenacapavir, the price has to come down very close to the price of tenofovir, which is also used for pre-exposure prophylaxis. Think about the number of HIV acquisitions we have every year, 1.3 million. That's a new HIV, somebody getting HIV somewhere in the world every 24 seconds, 3,500 people. So just thousands of people getting this. Now, in order to prevent 1.3 million HIV acquisitions per year, if you thought just about the Purpose 1 study, you have to treat about 40 people to prevent 1 HIV acquisition. Now, there are lots of different demand forecasts about how much lenacapavir or other forms of PrEP we'd need. If you multiply 1.3 by 46, you get into the numbers of tens of millions. Now, a lot of the forecasts that are being discussed at the moment are not at that range. We maybe need to start thinking about giving lenacapavir to certainly millions of people, if not tens of millions of people in the long term. Now, how do we calculate the cost of production of a drug like lenacapavir? First of all, we need to know how much drug is needed to treat somebody for a year. So this is 975 milligrams for 6 months. So it's about 2 grams of drug per year. On the right-hand side, you can see the chemical formula. And the way we work out the cost of production is we look at this in different ways. We look at the building blocks for lenacapavir, what are called key starting intermediates, KSMs. We look at the route of synthesis, which has been published. We look at the cost of making each of these key starting materials. We speak to companies in India and China that make these building blocks or KSMs. And then we put all these together into a route of synthesis with the costs of each stage. And then we talk to generic companies and see whether they believe that they could make the drug at the levels of price that we're predicting. So we've looked at different databases. We can see drugs moving around the world. We have the Panjiva database, the Trade Vision LLC, BLD Farm Clearinghouse. So we see shipments of either the building blocks of lenacapavir or the final product moving around the world. We can see how much they cost. So when we look on a database called Panjiva and Trade Vision, we've already seen lenacapavir being made, a kilogram of it, by a company called API Core in India and sent to Sandoz in Austria. Now, that was last November. And that 1 kilogram, a very small amount of drug, cost $64,000. that came down from prices in the region of $100,000 per kilogram in October, but that was for very small quantities. Now, generally with mass production, the more drug that's made, the lower the unit price goes. And we saw with hepatitis C, the cost of the API, the actual raw materials for the drug, came down by 90% in a year. So we're not going to see this $64,000 per kilo price for very long. It's going to come down very quickly. We keep looking at this database for more updates. Now, in the estimations of the cost of mass production, a few technical details here. We assume that you lose 5% of the raw materials during formulation. When you fill the vials for injection, you have to overfill them slightly by 7%. We're talking about quite a high cost for the vials, the formulation and packaging and excipients. That's after talking to some people who've got knowledge of how these vials are made for Lenacapavir. We then assume a 30% profit margin for generic suppliers. That it's important that the generic suppliers get a fair price and that they feel that they can make some money out of generic production. There's a danger of pricing things too low, and then you can lose generic suppliers. There's then a tax on that profit in India. We've used the same assumptions for many previous publications on costs of production. And I'll show you here the predictions that we've made before. So 10 years ago, a cure for hepatitis C cost $82,000. 10 years ago, we predicted it could be made for between $68 and $136. We published the results in Clinical Infectious Diseases. Now, sofosbuvir costs $21 in India. Dolutegravir, another treatment for hepatitis C, we predicted it would cost between $10 and $30. It's now $19. And it was Bristol Myers was selling it for $63,000. The list goes on. So we've made predictions before, and generally what happens is the drug company, in that case Gilead, said this is impossible, this can never be done, and in the fullness of time it's come true. So we're making these predictions given the same methodology that we're making the predictions for Lenacapavir using the same methodology that has turned out to be accurate in the past. In fact, normally we slightly overestimate the cost of production. So this is probably the most important slide of the talk. If we assume at the end of next year that generic Lenacapavir is launched and we have enough drug to treat 1 million people for a year, we'd need 2,000 kilograms of Lenacapavir to do that. Now remember, 1 kilogram was costing $64,000. We assume that Lenacapavir, the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient, the price is going to come down to $25,000 per kilo. That means that to treat one person for a year, you need 2 grams of drug, $53. Then you need to formulate it, put the vials for injection, profit margin, and the final price comes to $93 per year. So that's $93 million to treat 1 million people. Now, we move to the year 2 estimate when the generic companies have started to look at the organic synthesis in a little bit more detail. There needs to be a little bit of more funding to make sure this can be done. But we're confident the price of the API can then come down from $25,000 down to $10,000. So then, given the cost of API per person per year, the cost of formulation, profit margins, we're predicting that Lenacapavir could be made for $40 per year. Now remember, Gilead is charging $40,000. So this is 1,000th of the Gilead price. So $400 million would then treat 10 million people. Remember, 1.3 million HIV acquisitions per year. We're going to need to treat a lot of people to get that number down significantly. Now, that sort of summarizes what I've just said. So you've got the Gilead prices in the region of $40,000, and then you've got our generic production prices. This is how profound the reductions could be. And actually, if we look at HIV treatment, we go back 20 years, there were Indian generic companies saying, we can make drugs for $1 a day, when the likes of GlaxoSmithKline were saying it cost $10,000 a year. This has been done before. We're at a similar moment in 2024, where we need an extremely low price to have this vision of the beginnings of HIV elimination, of treating huge numbers of people and preventing large numbers of HIV infections. Now, what has Gilead said so far about access? They've made various statements. They updated their statement when Purpose 2 came out. So Gilead is saying, we will ensure dedicated Gilead supply in the countries where the need is greatest until voluntary licensing partners are able to supply high-quality, low-cost versions of Lenacapavir. They will develop a robust direct licensing program. They will target high-incidence, resource-limited countries. We're moving to negotiate these deals. Now, those are all general statements. There's no detail in there. What we're missing is some key things. We don't know when the drug will be produced, which companies are involved, how much the price is going to be for the generic. We also don't know how much Gilead is going to charge for their own version of lenacapavir. So actually, there's no detail in what Gilead is saying. It could be a year, it could be 2 months. We simply need to know what's actually going to happen. Which companies have been involved? I spoke to a generic company who've had no communication from Gilead at all, one of the largest generic companies in the world. I've heard of other generics companies that have to sign confidentiality agreements, non-disclosure agreements with Gilead, and they can't even mention voluntary licensing. So this is all being done in a very secret way, and that's very different to how we normally work with the medicines patent pool, with transparent contracts that everybody can see. Another concern here is, let's look at the history of Gilead and what they've done with voluntary licenses in the past. So these are the countries in green that are included in the voluntary license for tenofovir alafenamide. So you can see parts of Africa, a lot of Southern Asia. But look at the countries that are excluded. Most of South America, Mexico, North Africa, Middle East, and a lot of Central Asia. Now, lenacapavir is a drug to prevent HIV infection. Where is the HIV epidemic growing the fastest? This voluntary license would exclude countries where about a quarter of new HIV acquisitions occurred last year. Look at the countries where HIV incidence is falling: East and Southern Africa, West and Central Africa, Asia Pacific. A lot of those countries are included in the voluntary license, but look at where the epidemic is growing the fastest. Latin America, plus 10% in the last 10 years. That's excluded, not included in the voluntary license. Middle East, North Africa, HIV infections going up by 27%, excluded from the TAF voluntary license. Eastern Europe, Central Asia, HIV infections gone up 33% in the last 10 years, excluded from the Gilead voluntary license. So Gilead is actually excluding the parts of the world where the HIV epidemic is growing the fastest. So that could allow the HIV epidemic to carry on growing because of the restrictions on the voluntary licenses if they follow the same pattern they followed before. Now, what Gilead says is we're targeting high incidence countries with poor economies. Now, let's look at how that works out with the TAF voluntary license. So Gilead is saying if a country is poor, they'll be included. If they're rich, they'll be excluded. So this is, in blue, you've got countries that are excluded from the TAF voluntary license. In red, you've got ones that are not included. So let's look at Egypt and Morocco, poorer than South Africa and Indonesia, that are included. Look at Belarus, poorer than Brazil, that's excluded. Malaysia and Kazakhstan included, and then richer countries, Argentina, China, Russia. You can see there's no pattern here. Countries are being included and excluded with all sorts of different levels of gross national income per capita. Look at the countries that are excluded and look at the incidence of new HIV in those countries. Look at Brazil, excluded. MSM and transgender women, 9.2% incidence in one study. Mexico, excluded. Commercial sex workers, PWID, MSM, high incidence rates, but they won't get this drug. Egypt, Morocco, Bulgaria, Serbia, China, lots of different countries that are outside the normal voluntary licensing system. So the epidemic will just carry on growing because they can't access this drug. Now, there is another very important human rights issue, an ethical issue, that lenacapavir was tested on populations in low and middle income countries. So you look at the countries included in Purpose 2, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and Peru. Now, they have been excluded from previous Gilead voluntary licenses. In the Declaration of Helsinki, there's a very clear statement that rich populations should not exploit poor populations by testing on them new treatments from which they will never benefit. Now, if Gilead goes ahead, runs Purpose 2, as they have done, in Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and Peru, and then doesn't provide lenacapavir at an affordable price, is that a violation of human rights according to the Declaration of Helsinki? I think there's a serious questions to be asked here. If we look at the affordability, whether Gilead is able to grant a widespread voluntary license, look at the drug sales, $240 billion since 2001, profits of $114 billion. This is just HIV. Tax havens, $17 billion currently held offshore in 29 subsidiary companies, particularly in Ireland. There's a report from Citizens for Tax Fairness showing that Gilead avoided $10 billion by holding their intellectual property in Ireland by 2016. That's just up to 2016. You've got more money since then. Even the tax avoidance money from Gilead could provide PrEP for the world. So lenacapavir could and should be affordable. We should get to a situation very soon where lenacapavir could be mass-produced under voluntary licenses for approximately $40 per year. The question is, will Gilead actually allow this? Will they allow us to eliminate HIV worldwide, or will they allow the HIV epidemic to grow? We should have a target in the longer term of treating at least 10 million people with lenacapavir as PrEP as the mass production starts to increase. We'll need to treat very large numbers of people to lower HIV incidence significantly. The current number of people getting HIV, 1.3 million per year, that is a large number. The Gilead voluntary license for TAF is not consistent. It's excluding key countries with a high incidence of HIV, is excluding key countries with low incomes. We may need to start thinking about compulsory licensing if Gilead is not prepared to grant widespread licenses. This is what we think should be happening. The voluntary license, if we're serious about the elimination of HIV worldwide, voluntary license for lenacapavir should include all low and middle income countries. If we wanted $100 per person per year, this is not a large amount of money given the kind of sales and profits that we've seen in the HIV arena. So I think there's a huge amount of potential here. What we need is for Gilead to do the right thing and actually provide this drug at a price that's going to be affordable and that allows us to actually start thinking about eliminating HIV and reaching the UNAIDS targets by 2030. So Dana, that's what I had to say. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I already have a lot of questions, but there will be time for that. This is really exciting research. I'm going to now hand over to Mitchell, who also will lead us through his presentation.
Great. Can you hear me all right, Daniel? You can. Okay. Great. And Andy, thank you. It is always great to be with you and with Brooke and with Yvette. And hopefully this is going to build on a bit of what Andy said in terms of what it's going to take to translate these really thrilling clinical trial results into public health impact. And I'm really excited that Brooke and Yvette will add to that once I'm done. And I'll try to go quickly. Really quick outline. I'm going to talk a bit about the difference between options and choices, give a sense of where lenacapavir sits within the pipeline for prevention right now. I think it's important to look about our PrEP experience to date and the potential for really doing something across prevention as a platform. And then how do we do the right thing this time? I think it is safe to say that when I look back over the last 12 years, we have squandered every opportunity in PrEP possible. And I am keen that we don't do that again, that we have to seize the opportunity that Andy just described. But a quick language check. I think what's really important is what fundamentally we want is for people to have choices across the prevention portfolio. And what we have are a bunch of options. And I distinguish the difference there, that options are the biomedical methods. That biomedical methods are the products that research and development create and that get added to the method mix. And that's largely about science and product development. But making those choices, making those options actually possible for people really requires a much more complex array of stakeholders. Andy began to describe that. And not just the product developers, but also policymakers, donors, governments, and implementers, and certainly civil society. So we make this available widely to everyone, everywhere, just as Andy was describing. And we know this works. This is an example of what happened in contraception. It wasn't just the development of new contraceptive technology. It was when those contraceptives actually became available that prevalence of contraceptive use went up, and that we saw real impact. And we have always assumed and hoped that we'd see something similar with HIV. And certainly advocacy has been a driver of that. Yvette Raphael is on with me today, and she, as you heard in her introduction, represents the Women's Accountability Board. Just a little over a year ago, they launched the Choice Manifesto that really describes this transition from options to choices. And I think we have representatives too from the Global Key Population and Prevention Advisory Group, who shortly after presented and launched their roadmap for key populations and prevention. Both documents really coming from person-centered, community-based leadership saying this is what needs to happen. And one thing I want to highlight is that any product has to be viewed across a range of product considerations. As Andy described, and I'll go in a little bit more detail, Lenacapavir was shown to be incredibly effective in both the Purpose 1 and Purpose 2 studies. But products have to navigate all of these components. It's not just how effective a product is, it's the dosing and duration. It's the desirability that someone might want a systemic product versus a topical product. There's issues of how burdensome is this on the health system. And that relates to perhaps how burdensome it is for the user. And a great example of that is that oral PrEP is actually incredibly safe and effective if you take it every day. But there's a big burden on a user to take a pill every day, but there's very limited burden on the health system. Compare that, of course, to cabotegravir and lenacapavir, perhaps easier for a user as long as they're willing to get an injection. But there's more burden on the health system. And there's not just product cost, there's also programmatic cost. So a lot that we still don't know about these products, cabotegravir and lenacapavir, but just to flag that there's never one product, because and no product's gonna solve for everything. It's really about what we do programmatically. And just to highlight that in a spoiler alert here, while I am incredibly excited about lenacapavir, as I am about the other PrEP options, there is no, and I believe never will be, a miracle drug. Every product has its issues, side effects, prices, deliverability issues, you name it. I just want to really position that, because what we need to be doing as advocates, I believe, is pushing to build a platform that can deliver these products, but also future products to come. This just gives you a huge snapshot. In addition to oral TDF-FTC that we've had now since 2012, so remember that, almost 13 years of oral PrEP. We now have a range of new products, the dapivirine vaginal ring, cabotegravir, now in a number of countries, but in very, very limited supply. Of course, the lenacapavir program, which I'll talk about in a tad more detail. I'll also mention that Purpose 1 was looking not only at lenacapavir, but also at FTAF, which has been approved, at least by the US regulatory agency, but only for some populations. This was going to be the first data around efficacy of oral FTAF in cisgender women. Very importantly, I can't seem to go back. Very importantly, there is another product in development for oral PrEP, and that is a monthly pill from Merck called MK8527. It is just in a phase 2 trial now, but if those results are positive later this year, we expect a phase 3 study could start sometime next year. And while lenacapavir is incredible, and as is CAB, the ability to have a single tablet once a month, but I think to Andy's point, we all want to be sure that the conversations that Andy just described with Gilead, pushing on licensing, pushing on geographies, needs to happen with Merck at the same time, because a monthly pill could be a really exciting option. And then there's a dual prevention pill, a pill that combines oral PrEP with oral contraception. We know that for many cisgender women, the idea of a product that meets multiple needs at the same time is highly desirable. That is a combination of two pre-existing approved products. It has just passed its pivotal bioequivalence study, and it could be entering the market sometime next year around the same time as lenacapavir. So it's a really dynamic space, and I want to make sure that we don't end up focusing on a single product, because that doesn't help the ultimate public health need. We talk about choice, and I showed you what happened in contraception, and this has been a driver of our advocacy. I want to highlight data even before I get to lenacapavir, because my new favorite number is 0. This was data that was presented at the Retrovirus conference in March, about 6 months ago, and it looked at a discrete project in Kenya and Uganda, building on the SEARCH study, which was a very large study over many years. Okay, that was building on a large platform study over many years. And in blue, the bars you see are the people who were offered a dynamic choice between oral PrEP, oral PEP, and injectable cabotegravir, compared to the orange, where they just had access to oral PrEP as a standard of care. And what you can see first is that coverage of prevention went way up when they were given choices. Very importantly, again, my favorite number in an HIV study is 0. You saw 0 infections in the group that had access to choice, and yet you saw 7 infections in the standard of care, about a 2% incidence rate. And I'll come back to why 2% matters. And what you can see in the bottom, which I think is so important, is people who had the choice didn't just choose cabotegravir. What you can see is that use of oral PrEP went up. Not everybody wanted injectable cabotegravir. I don't believe that everyone's going to want injectable lenacapavir. And what you can see is that using something went dramatically up. And I think that's really important. I will say, importantly, the SEARCH study is now adding the dapivirine vaginal ring as an additional choice. So we'll begin to see even more data as the ecosystem grows. But then we'll get to lenacapavir, and this is just a quick snapshot of the studies. Purpose 1, which had the result that was presented in Munich with 5,000 cisgender women enrolled. Purpose 2, results just out last week, and this graphic is being updated. These results obviously coming a little bit earlier than the end of 2024. We're sitting here in September. Oh, I'm so sorry. And what we now know, and Andy described, that Gilead did say in their access statement that they're planning to issue to apply for regulatory approval before the end of this year. So that blue check mark is going to move to the end of 2024, which means this red check mark of how early this could come to market could be as early as 2025. And so we see the timeline compressing, which is incredibly exciting. There are 3 other studies looking at specific populations that regulatory agencies were interested in and requiring. Cisgender women in the US, although we know it's safe and effective, there was a desire by the US FDA to see data amongst cisgender women, and that trial is ongoing. Very importantly, a trial of lenacapavir amongst people who inject drugs, a population that is too often left behind in prevention trials, and I would argue too often left behind in many different kinds of trials, and then a requirement in Europe to have data accrued in Europe. So those trials are much smaller, and they are continuing to run. But the important thing to note is that we are on a fast clock right now, and we need to make sure we don't squander the opportunity. This just is a single slide to give you a real quick sense, and you saw some of this from Andy. In Purpose 1, the trial on the top half of the slide, you have the additional arm of FTAF. And what you can see, again, remember, SEARCH study, I said that incidence rate in the standard of care was about 2%, which is similar to what you see in these oral arms of Purpose 1. And the background incidence was estimated to be 2.4%. Lenacapavir, again, no infections in that arm of the study. So it's described as 100% safe and effective. And it is was presented in Munich, and this is the headline from the New England Journal. And then just last week, Purpose 2 trials, the second pivotal study. This is a trial that was done amongst gay men and other men who have sex with men, transgender individuals, and non-binary individuals having sex with men. And you can see it was not perfect. There was a 96% reduction between the arm of Lenacapavir compared to the background incidence. So there were 2 infections in Lenacapavir, and we really need to understand that. And we've not seen any more data. I believe, in fact, that Purpose 2 data will be presented at the Research for Prevention conference coming up in just a couple of weeks in Lima, Peru. But there were 2 infections, and we need to understand, were those breakthrough infections? Were those people in the trial who perhaps missed their every 6-month injection and missed the window? We know nothing because this was just a press release. So we are keen to see more data presented there. I will also flag that when we look at Cabotegravir, remember 083, the trial in gay men and other men who have sex with men and transgender women, also saw slightly higher in numbers of infections than in HPTN 084, the trial of Cabotegravir in cisgender women. And that had remarkable, the efficacy of Cab in cisgender women was incredibly high, not quite 100%, but very close. So I think it's really important that we understand that we now have 2 very potent injectable products that do seem to work slightly differently in different populations, and we need to understand what's going on there. I want to spend a minute talking about how we get to what Andy's describing, because it absolutely, and I completely agree, we need, and I'll describe at the end, the need for voluntary licenses. We need multiple voluntary licenses. We need transparency. We need the geographic coverage of those licenses to be just as broad as Andy described. But we also need donors to step up and fund the procurement of these products and the programming of these products. And you can see back in 2015, when UNAIDS put out their 2020 target, the idea was to get 3 million people in need of PrEP access to oral PrEP. And 5 years later, there were fewer than 500,000 people accessing PrEP. And yet the number of new infections hadn't dropped at all. It plateaued from this point, even though the target was there. So we've struggled with oral PrEP. And then in 2025, the new target was updated. Instead of 3 million people on PrEP, the new model to drive to epidemic control, as UNAIDS describes it, is to get 10 million person years of PrEP protection over the course of by 2025. And we clearly aren't there. And I'll show you why we're not there. That this is data from our global PrEP tracker. And you can see this is PrEP initiations, not users. There are, over the last 12 years, we've seen 7.5 million people initiate oral PrEP. And that does not mean they are using. The best estimate right now is that the overall oral PrEP market is about 3 million users globally. And what Andy just described is to get to the price point at the start with the generic, talked about getting 1 million people access to Len. And so we have some significant issues of what it takes to build a market, because right now that market for PrEP is too small to have impact. And so we need to both push on all the issues Andy described, but also push on building the market side. There is good news here, and it really is important to note that over the last 3 years, particularly with investments from PEPFAR, at least in sub-Saharan Africa, you see some significant growth in a number of PrEP markets. But again, as Andy described, this does not correlate with where the greatest number of new infections are coming from. So we're seeing increases in the PrEP market, but not necessarily in some of the geographies, particularly in Eastern Europe, in South Asia, and in Latin America, where we need to be accelerating. Work that we do at AVAC in support of a relatively new coalition to accelerate access to long-acting PrEP is tracking across these 3 new PrEP products: injectable Cabotegravir, the Dapivirine vaginal ring, and Lenacapavir. You are not expected to read this slide, and These slides will be shared, but there is a hyperlink. These get updated every quarter to give a sense of what the status is for each of these 3 products and what the next set of priorities are. And you can see that Lenacapavir, when it was done in June, we at the time didn't yet even know about Purpose 1. So a lot of need for what needs to happen in Purpose 2. And it's important to note it needs to happen across all of these different color-coded domains. It's not just about the product with pricing, manufacturing, and generics. It's about approvals and guidelines, planning and budgeting from ministries of health and donors, the delivery and supply chain, how stakeholders need to be engaged. There's still a research agenda because there's much we don't know about all 3 of these products. And then there's the monitoring and evaluation aspect. On that page on the website, you'll also see snapshots. Now, these represent quick snapshots of approvals, volumes, and implementation related to both DVR and CAB. Lenacapavir, once approved, hopefully by the middle of next year, we'll start to see these graphics created. And each one of these you can click down on and go into more detail. But one that I wanted to go into more detail on is the volume supply of cabotegravir. And I know we're talking here about lenacapavir, but I want to spend a minute on one of the challenges. Well, there are a lot of challenges, but one, and again, ViiV did license cabotegravir eventually to the Medicines Patent Pool, who in turn licensed 3 generics. Those 3 generics have yet to come to market. Even with a license, I often compare a license, whether through the MPP or direct, much like a driver's license. If you have a driver's license, that's great, but you don't have a car, you can't drive. So if you have a license but don't have the technology, don't have the orders, don't have the components, the license itself does not deliver product nor prevent infections. And we still sit here with cabotegravir only coming from ViiV, and it's coming from ViiV at least for non-commercial supplies in very, very low quantities. Over this 2.5-year period, mid-2023 to the end of 2025, only 1.2 million doses are even available. And with CAB, you need 6 doses a year plus an initial dose. So this is no more than 200,000 person years of protection over 2 years. And so challenge 1 is the volume has been too small. But challenge 2 is that donors aren't even buying what's available. Now, part of that is about price. The current price of cabotegravir works out to about $180 per person per year. So significantly higher than oral PrEP and significantly higher than the data Andy just showed you potentially for generic lenacapavir. But even at that price, donors haven't even bought 659,000 doses, the balance of 2024 supply and what's available for 2025. So it's not just is product available, it's are donors going to buy the product? We're told that PEPFAR is looking to make an investment for 2025 with these 600,000 vials, but that's only 100,000 people. And so the programs that are needed to get to 1 million people using any injectable product, whether CAB or LEN, needs to still be built. So we need to make sure that we are working in parallel across all of these different domains. To flag on pricing, just to give you a sense, clearly we want to get to be cost effective with any of these PrEP products. It's about getting it to the right people who are potentially at risk of acquiring HIV. It's not just a procurement. Not every person getting any of these products may be someone at risk of infection. So to be cost effective, you need to target your program very well, but we need a very low cost product, and we need to move all of these products, Ring, CAB, and LEN, much closer, much more rapidly to price parity with oral PrEP. And that does take time. You need generics. This just gives you a quick snapshot, and I think we're doing something similar with lenacapavir. You can see that the license from ViiV to MPP only happened 6 months or 7 months after FDA approval, and it still took almost 9 months before sub-licenses were granted. So these licenses came 18 months after regulatory approval. What we need to be advocating for is not just the licenses themselves, but the timing of those licenses. We at AVAC, and I think hopefully all of you on this call in the network, really we want to push Gilead to make these licenses available even before they apply to FDA at the end of the year. And hopefully we'll see licenses. And if you can do that, you can imagine that could save 18 months to begin with. But even once you get the license, there are all of these steps. Some companies might already be involved, we're told, in API development of LEN, but you see these significant pieces of how long it takes. The one thing that's really important, and one of the reasons lenacapavir is taking that generic cabotegravir is taking so long to get to the market, is a requirement from the WHO pre-qualification program and regulatory agencies. that are requiring a bioequivalent study. That is to, you have to compare the generic product with the approved product right now from ViiV. That study basically takes about 14 months. So another advocacy point is, how do we make sure that the bioequivalence requirement for Len is much shorter? And we don't yet know what that requirement will be from either WHO or from regulatory agencies. But you can see that even if the companies, the generics, had cabotegravir ready to ship to programs today, in the end of 2024, they can't be approved without this bioequivalence study. So we need to make sure that we not only talk about licensing, but every one of these steps, and make sure that we compress these as quickly as possible. In addition to getting the price down, we need to get the time compressed. I want to talk just for a second about various things you'll hear. There's the price. So cabotegravir is the price to donors in low and middle income countries is $180 per person per year. But what's the cost? What's the cost of goods? We don't actually know that. What's cost effectiveness? And ultimately, what's the cost to prevent an infection? And I want to highlight that we do clearly need to get to much lower prices and get to price parity, as I said. But to do that, we need the volume from the donors. So we need to get, as Andy showed, if we need 1 million people accessing, we need that's actually 4 million vials of lenacapavir, because you get 2 doses at each visit every 6 months. So you need 4 doses a year. So we need 4 million vials purchased. We need the time for those companies to be building, and we need multiple generics, because the price drops more quickly when you get multiple generics competing for the tenders, for the procurements that are put out by ministries of health and donors. So we don't want just one generic. We need multiple generics to do that. And that's really what's critical. And as I think Andy described, some of this, Gilead has yet to set a price for Len. We know we need to get to price parity with daily oral PrEP, so down to $40 a year. And Andy showed that may be, at least in their model, possible with 10 million people getting access to the product. But to do that, we need to start today, because we don't know how long it's going to take for generics to get to market. We don't know those requirements yet from the regulatory agencies. So we need to work with what the supply is. We need that price to be lower than it is capped for PrEP. We need multiple generics so that they all are getting to production at scale, so that they're competing. And we need price transparency and this pathway to the programs. Just to give you a quick sense of why this needs multiple generics, this is just a quick analysis of oral TDF-FTC that is currently $40 a year from generics. That didn't happen overnight. It happened over 15 years. And the blue line above is Gilead's price of oral TDF-FTC. Their price did decline over 13 years by 12%. But the big difference was when you had multiple generics. There are now 15 companies making TDF-FTC, competing for a massive market. And you can see that's how the price drops. So it's volume, and it's having multiple companies. So we need to be working on all levels. The world, as I said, has squandered every possible opportunity when it comes to oral PrEP. It is absolutely an epic failure by global health, all of us, that we knew oral PrEP we knew it worked in 2010, and here we sit in 2024, and there are only 3 million people accessing it. The ring, we've also seen very sluggish process and activity. Cabotegravir has gone a little faster. You saw much better regulatory approval, faster WHO recommendation, the first projects much sooner from efficacy. But when's generic cab going to be available? It could be 7 years from when we first knew it worked. So we have to shrink that timeline for every future product. This, to me, we did a little better with cab than we did with Len, cab than we did with ring and oral. We need to go even faster with Len. We also need to go bigger. Many of these PrEP projects for the last 12 years have been stuck in this area of implementation, research, demonstration projects. We need scale. We need scale not only to get the price down, but more importantly, we need scale to deliver impact. 3 million people on PrEP in the world is not going to deliver the impact in public health terms. So the critical issues now, a lot is on Gilead. We need to make sure that they go quickly with many regulatory submissions, transparent volume, what they can make and what their price is going to be, non-exclusive license to multiple manufacturers in multiple geographies. And we need, just what Andy was saying, we need that not-for-profit price based not on World Bank economic status. We need it based on on the epidemiologic need. That's the driver. We need WHO to urgently initiate guidelines development so that they're available as soon as regulatory approval might happen, which is the middle of next year. And then on all of us, the donors, ministries of health, and civil society, we have to push not only for the volumes, but we need to push for the scaled introduction programs to get designed and funded. Because if there are no programs, we don't need the product. And we need, as civil society, to hold all parties to account. I want to just highlight just this morning, and I'm in the US, so East Coast time, there is a new podcast that we just put out on our PX Pulse podcast that really is about a lot of these issues. Dr. Flavia from the Purpose One study describes the results, and my friend and colleague Chilufia Hapongo from Talc in Zambia and I talk about what is needed to deliver on the promise. And at the end of the day, this is about going faster, going bigger, and going with equity if we want to have impact. And lots of thanks to everybody. And Daniel, I'll turn it back to you.
Sorry. Yep, there we go. Thank you so much for that presentation. And just to let everyone know, I know this is a lot coming at you very quickly, but we will be sharing a recording of this webinar, and the slides will be, and it will also, we'll also share the slides. They will be on our website, but we'll also send this out in our forthcoming newsletter. Now we're going to have a panel discussion, and our panelists are, in addition to Dr. Hill and Mitchell, you also hear from Brooke Baker and Yvette Raphael. So my first question actually there's a question that came in from someone that had to leave. I think it's a question that really helps to put all of this into context. And I'm going to pose it first to Brooke, and then I'll ask Yvette to respond. So I guess, Brooke, I mean, as a lawyer and a legal expert, how effective are our present legal mechanisms to addressing access gaps, and also the regulatory hurdles? Just looking at the landscape as it exists, I guess globally. And then if Yvette, once Brooke's finished, I would ask you to maybe think of to present a view as it could be on the ground.
So thanks for the question and for the opportunity to analyze what the legal landscape is and to some extent how activism interacts with that legal landscape. So we know that Gilead's current plan is to have bilateral voluntary licenses, which mean they're highly under its control. And even though we don't have much detail about what it intends, we know that it's likely to be quite geographically restricted, as Andrew pointed out. Only high incidence country and only low resource, which is, a relatively smaller portion of the total global population in need. But there will be other aspects if it's a bilateral voluntary license, which is basically just commercial contracts is one way to think of them. They may have some access goals, but really they're just private arrangements. They can control the field of use, whether it's for PrEP and what, if anything, in treatment is covered or not. They could certainly control who the suppliers are and the number of suppliers that there might be. They can control issues about transparency and anti-diversion measures and many other things that we've seen previously in company-controlled bilateral licensing. And so, those are legal arrangements, but they're even more highly controlled and restricted because they are finely tuned to the ultimate commercial interests of Gilead and other big pharma companies. And what they in particular always seek to achieve is to reserve for themselves the more profitable upper middle income countries that are typically excluded from bilateral voluntary licenses. They're also included sometimes from MPP licenses, but frankly, to a lesser extent. Then you go to licenses to the medicine patent pool. And many in our community are advocating that Gilead should immediately resume negotiations with the medicine patent pool to enter into more public interest oriented voluntary licenses that actually have MPP work as a middleman to help arrangements with qualified generic producers. And those licenses typically have greater geographic scope. They typically have provisions that require that licensees be able to supply countries that issue compulsory licenses. And they often have provisions that there could also be supplies to countries where there are no patent barriers, which in some cases will include even upper middle income countries where the originator, in this case Gilead, may not have bothered to file patent applications. They provide for transparency. They provide openness with respect to regulatory data that's necessary for regulatory purposes, et cetera, et cetera. So there are many advantages to MPP licenses, with the downside still that there are certain upper middle income countries that are virtually always excluded even from MPP licenses. And those are some of the countries which, again, as Andrew's slide pointed out, are high burden, high incidence countries, particularly with respect to key population, which are often over neglected already. Another option that we see is that countries can issue compulsory licenses. And Andrew, I'm very glad that Andrew mentioned that in his presentation, because it's my view and the view of many others that countries need to start acting proactively to work together when they're excluded from voluntary licenses to enact compulsory licenses on key medical technologies, including, in this case, lenacapavir. And basically, it's permission by a government to allow a generic producer to overcome the patent barrier, to pay a small royalty to the originator, Gilead, and to supply at hopefully a much more affordable price. I want to go back to the kind of voluntary measures and kind of make clear that Gilead will also be able to and is intending to enter into tiered pricing arrangements with countries that are not included in its voluntary license. And these are often shrouded by non-disclosure agreements where countries are prohibited from disclosing the outrageous tiered prices that Gilead will charge. And we certainly know from the past, when we've had greater transparency with respect to antiretroviral therapies, that when a company has the ability to charge tiered prices, upper middle income countries in particular always pay ridiculously higher prices than the true access prices that are available and comparable to generic production. I think I should also mention the regulatory barriers because they're key. And we know that that's a legal structure which requires that products be proven to be safe, effective, and enduring sufficient quality controls. And it's country by country typically, though there are some regional regulatory mechanisms as well. But we know that it's fast-tracked and the country registration is easier when there's WHO pre-qualification or regulatory approval by certain other entities, including European Medical Agency has a regulatory pathway that gives special impetus to then follow on registration in developing countries. And agree totally with what Warren was saying, that these procedures need to be speeded up. There's already been a delay. Gilead could have begun the regulatory process 3 months earlier after the results of Purpose 1 with respect to the population that was studied in Africa and should have. It's waited another 3 months. So here we are, we're 3 months later in terms of actually beginning the regulatory process. But that has to be speeded up as much as possible. We need Gilead to commit to registering broadly, because where it doesn't register its product, there's not going to be access for any period of time because it will not be authorized for use. And of course, we have to have Gilead allow product availability to generic producers, either compulsory licensees or voluntary licensees, to do the comparative trials that are necessary. But I agree with Warren as well that anything we can do to speed up the processes, particularly at WHO, with respect to the length and the kind of process for bioequivalence studies, but frankly, their entire WHO pre-qualification process and their guideline development process, which we should also miss, and which is a key requirement, as a precondition many times to national registration. So those are just some of the key legal issues. And the issue is, to me, overall, the takeaway is, if we leave this solely to the discretion of the patent holder, of the originator, of Gilead, we will be slower and less effective, and they will be calling the shots. and there will be reduced supply and efficacy as a result. If we get MPP involvement, if we get speed up by WHO, if we get donors to commit early to supplies, if we get generic producers to be capacitated and bringing products to market as quickly as possible, if we do demand creation and greater health literacy on PrEP and the new PrEP alternatives, we could have population results so much faster than if we wait on the delayed unilateral efforts of Gilead alone.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Over to you, Yvette. I'm wondering if you could help to put all of us into context as, how do these hurdles, barriers, failure to bring these promising innovations to scale, what does it look like on the ground? Yvette, I'm sure you're here.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel, and thanks for the invitation. I think first, let me introduce myself, Yvette Raphael, Executive Director of APA, a partner of the CASPA Coalition, as well as the Secretariat for the African Women's Prevention Community Accountability Board. So that gives an idea of just how focused we are on HIV prevention. First of all, I also would like to say adolescent girls and young women in Africa remain the face of HIV in Africa. And I feel the reason for that is because we have not taken HIV prevention seriously. Women don't have a positive story to tell when it comes to HIV prevention, specifically focused for them. And we're not getting over the hurdle where we speak about just how people do not see the urgency for HIV prevention. And we can say funders, policymakers, our governments do not see the need and the urgency for HIV prevention as we see it as the African Women's Prevention Accountability Board. We still see a lot of gaps when it comes to access, and we see how these products, just yesterday, an op-ed was penned by Mark Seidner as well as Rochelle Walensky to say tested in Africa and used in America. For anyone reading this can easily be something exciting, something that has a spin of showing just how inequality works. But for us as African women, this was really a sore point to read that we have been saying that these products, this research happens in Africa, but these products do not reach our hands. And it's a difficult pill to swallow, because not only do we participate in research trials, but we also participate in these global advisory boards, these global advisory panels, sitting on the community advisory panel for MPP as well, but also with the Gilead Purpose One advisory board. And we are not seeing the change. And our conclusion is, one of the big issues is HIV prevention does not get the same attention that HIV treatment gets. And I think if we want to see a change, we need to be serious about HIV prevention. I hear you talk about some of the legal barriers, but when we were fighting for HIV treatment, legal people, advocates, people globally came together, and we advocates globally came together, and we had a plan of action on how to take serious HIV treatment, not only one product, but treatment as a whole. I am worried when we want to focus on only one product, but I think we should focus on the prevention of HIV and who it targets the most. Africa will forever use the example for COVID, because we've seen how some of these, these steps within licensing can make it can be quicker, but now that it's the African story, there is a lot of hurdles. Who carries the burden of this? And I think we need to continue to fight and ensure that we actually have access to the products. I think, Mitchell, you've mentioned this before. Make sure we do use the products that are available and ensure that becomes accessible. However, push for HIV prevention and these new products to reach the hands of the people that need it most. In our setting in Africa, we just understand that these products will always have a delayed response to reach us because of some of the hurdles that are there, including a price. So I would really like for us to rethink our advocacy, and Unitate and all of us together think, how are we going to advocate, first of all, to make HIV prevention a priority, but not a product. And that is where our worry is, that every time there is a product available, we fight for its accessibility, and the response is the same. A delayed reaction, Africa will get it last. So let's think around how we can advocate together to ensure that these processes are made shorter, and these products reach the hands of those who need it the most.
Thank you so much, Yvette. So I'll have one more question for all the panelists, and then I'll take a question or two from the chat. And I'm happy to see that we're having quite a good discussion going on there. So the question to all our speakers and panelists today is, we're the United Advocates Network. So a big part, we exist to advance the priorities and strategic direction for Unitate. And Unitate is a vital connector in the big global health architecture. What do you think? What is Unitate's role in addressing these some of the barriers and challenges that we've discussed today? And what's its role, and what has it done? Well, we've talked about the DTG success story, but what could it also do better? And I'd probably start with Andrew, Brooke, Yvette, and Mitchell.
I think Unitate has an excellent track record. They've done a lot of good things in the past. With Lenacapavir, I think we need to think about where we want to be. How are we going to make sure that 1 million people are ready to take this and there is funding for it within the next year? I don't see any reason why it should take longer than that. During COVID, we had vaccines and treatments approved at record speeds. There are precedents for this. I've spoken to Indian generic companies who are ready to make that first 1 million person use of treatment at the prices we predicted. Everything's there. The trials have been completed. They could be reviewed. What is the rate limiting step? But I think Unitate's role sometimes has been in market shaping and organizing the funding for the first big purchase. So often with MedAccess, part of the UK, allied with the US, the UK Foreign Office, the Gates Foundation, other funders, to make sure that these first orders go through at the prices that we're talking about. But I mean, I think they've done great things in the past, and I'm hoping they can do this in the future.
Thank you. Brooke?
So thanks for this question, because it's really important, especially since we are, many of us are connected to Unitaid and wanted to be playing an even more important role. Just to clarify some of the background work that Unitaid has done that structures this space and how important it's been even where we are now. I mean, Unitaid has in its portfolio the support for the development of long-acting technologies. That's been a project of theirs for some years now. They've worked with key partners, and that's beginning to play out. Obviously, they're not the only funder or supporter of such long-acting technologies and formulations, but it's really important. And they had their eye on this issue some time ago, and therefore have been instrumental in trying to develop products that are better suited for use by people who need the products and for the context in which they live. Secondly, it helped establish the medicine patent pool, which is the best place to do voluntary licenses at present, even though it's not perfect. It does not always cover all the countries that we need, all the populations that need to be served. It's supported and is supported for a long time WHO pre-qualification, which is for many countries a necessary first step for them to consider regulatory approval themselves. And then there's the WHO collaborative registration procedures, which can greatly expedite national regulatory approval because the WHO pre-qualification dossier is shared on a confidential basis, and countries are given a deadline within which to make their decision. Unitaid has some impact on WHO guidance, and it does that both by support of implementation studies, but frankly also by funding directly to WHO in enabler grants with respect to coming up with regulatory or clinical guidance that's needed, again, that is typically followed by countries. A couple areas where I think UNITAID could do more. UNITAID needs to take the lead in demanding transparency with respect to pricing and agreements in general. The idea that Gilead could come up with its own bilateral, private, secret licenses is just pretty outrageous. And the idea that there would not be price transparency. So we think UNITAID needs to really jump on this issue to avoid some of its past practice with respect to signing non-disclosure agreements itself. It needs to make common cause with other major procurers, including Global Fund and UNICEF and Gavi and whoever else is involved in this space, to make sure that we know what prices are, what supply agreements are, what the licensing and technology transfer agreements are, so that we have visibility and therefore accountability of what is actually happening. We think that UNITAID could also play a much more vigorous pathfinder and influencer role in this space. Gilead needs to be called out. Of course, that's the duty of all of us as well, but global health institutions, especially influential ones like UNITAID, need to step up their game in terms of calling out big pharma companies that are taking slow steps and backward steps with respect to critical access needs. And Gilead is stepping back from its past practice of openly licensing with the medicine patent pool, of having much broader licenses than it seems to be planned for this. And it should be subject to pressure, direct public pressure, we think, from key health institutions, not just UNAIDS, but UNITAID as well. And there's been some of this already by UNITAID. It has called for licensing and earlier action by Gilead, but we think it could have an even stronger voice in this respect. One last thing, just in terms of emphasizing what UNITAID does, is it's one of the key funders of health literacy and demand creation. And to go back to what Yvette was talking about, to some extent, the failure of PrEP in the past spoils the present moment for PrEP as well. And we have to do a lot of work at the community level, I think, to really help people be much more aware of what PrEP can accomplish. Certainly for women, but for key populations as well. Really build the case that the products will be well suited, that they will have choices that they can make, and that this will have life-saving and prevention benefits beyond the single user going forward. So just to emphasize that role, but that's another place where civil society and people on this call play a big role in raising the profile of PrEP and prevention more broadly.
Thank you, Yvette.
Thank you so much. And I want to re-emphasize the issue around the role generics played during not only access to treatment, but also with Dolutegravir. And we've seen some, companies come together to work together to solve that problem when it comes to HIV treatment. That's great stuff. If I had to title just say in one sentence, generic companies, we've seen what you've done for treatment, we've seen what you've done for Dolutegravir, but can you do the same for HIV prevention too? It is time that we change this. The same issues that some of these drug companies have, including not enough demand, generic companies promise advocates, we advocate for that. And at the end of the day is when we want to see rings, when we want to see pills, when we want to see jabs, we get the same thing. Where is the demand? Who is going to buy what we are doing? And I think one of the things that MPP needs to do is to ensure that these generic companies, or as well as UNITAID, is to ensure that there is a community engagement piece in the generic companies' proposals when they talk to, when they apply for licensing, or when they are approved to get these licenses. Because currently, when we meet with the generic companies, they tell us the same thing. Where is the demand? Where would we be able to, how do we know? Give us the purchase orders. That's not the discussion we as advocates need to have with them. We advocated for you to get a license. Now you need to give us the drug. And I don't think generic companies have a great track record. For MPP, I think, crack the whip on these generic companies. We have a story that is called Cabalet when it comes to generic companies getting licensing. And I want us to focus on this is for HIV prevention and not treatment. We need to compare apples with apples. Currently, when we look at HIV prevention, the generic companies are not making the speed that we expected them. They also promised us prior to our meeting and us advocating for MPP license, for MPP to go through the licensing processes, did we meet with them? And they did promise us we can make it within a year, we can make it within 2 years. Those are the promises we on the ground, women on the ground, for women to participate continuously in studies. We say these things will become available, and we have the same question. I like Brooke saying that we need to use COVID and say, what can we learn from COVID to ensure that these products become available as soon as possible, and make sure that it becomes cheaper. My last point here is, if we look at innovation, it's all good and well that we do these innovation once, twice a year, injectable HIV prevention, but can we also be innovative with the price to think ahead? And this is what advocates asked for when we did the consultations, when we were part of the advisory boards for Purpose One, for VIV, all of these things is, can you also be innovative for the price? We know who need these drugs. So over and over are drug developers making the same mistake by making drugs that really are unaffordable for Africa. So is the real end point for Africa to be able to access these drugs, for women and girls in Africa to be able to access these medications, as well as ensuring that when we do these innovations, we understand the African landscape and understand how the SRHR, as well as the sexual and reproductive health rights of women, work in Africa. Having it for 6 months may look like something that is so wow, so amazing, that we even dub it as a miracle. However, does it suit into our lifestyle? Does it suit in the young girl's lifestyle? Is it something that young people will be okay with having a drug? Yes, it's proven to work. 6 months, every 2 months, you get an injection. Well, it's superior. But in the reality of our lives, will somebody in Africa agree to have a drug that long acting in their bodies? Or do we again have this idea that we will just take everybody, give them an injection, and our problems are solved? And also, treating our way out of HIV is not the solution. We have so many people growing older with HIV and that will need HIV treatment. The future for HIV prevention is young, and we have to center women and young people when we have these discussions around HIV prevention and Africa. Thank you.
A fact to follow. But thank you so much for that, Yvette. Michelle, over to you, and then after, I think I'll take, we'll bring this panel to a close. Michelle? Great.
Well, I'll just say viva, Yvette, viva. It is hard to follow Yvette always, but it's a great honor. I just want to maybe focus on the question of Unidate and take it out a little bit more broadly. I think we really need to recognize that there is pressure to be put on every possible stakeholder, including on civil society. There's a ton, and I put in my last slide, we have a lot that Gilead has got to do, and we need as advocates to hold them accountable. But if this is just left to Gilead, we are screwed, because this is not about just licenses. This is not just about the price that they sell this product at. I want to come back to just dollars and cents. If you take the data that Andy showed, let's assume, And we know that generics aren't going to be available next year. It's impossible because the first you have to have the innovator product approved by regulators. That's going to get approved by mid 2026 or mid 2025. We need to make sure that generics get to market way faster than they have with CAB. And I showed you that slide of where we need to compress that, whether it's through MPP or not, how we compress that. That's going to come down to regulatory decisions. That's going to come down to WHO pre-qualification team not putting a 14-month bioequivalence requirement. So if our advocacy only, and I want to be really clear, AVAC takes no money from any pharma companies because we want to be able to criticize easily and collaborate when needed. But it's on all of us. If there's a 15-month bioequivalence requirement, then it doesn't matter when the licenses, licenses need to get signed, but so where's the advocacy? We need to go to regulators. We need to go to WHO to say, we believe the pharmacokinetic data are such and such, and we think it should be this, not that. So I just want to make sure that we think about, and I think this is where, I'm not answering your question, Daniel, about Unitaid yet. I'll get there in a second. But as the advocates network, we need to be comprehensive in our advocacy, looking at every single stakeholder. And the two things for Unitaid. One, I think, and I think Brooke described it, Unitaid has a great track record in looking at market shaping, and they have actually a project already with VITS Reproductive Health and HIV Institute in South Africa that's both looking at introduction implementation science, but also looking at market shaping with generics. For CAB, that needs to get expanded with LEN. Whether it's through the MPP or not, there's work that can be done. It's a great example. But the other piece is programmatically what needs to happen. So if you go to Andy's data, let's just say generics get to the market in 2026 or 2027. And even if they got there next year, 2025, 1 million people on CAB, or I'm sorry, on LEN at $100 per person per year, that's $100 million. That is already 2.5 times what PEPFAR, Global Fund, and the ministries of health that procure PrEP spend on PrEP programs today. Where's that money going to come from? Where is the $100 million going to come from? Unitaid has been one of the pioneers. They have been catalytic. Some of the first programs that Unitaid funded around oral PrEP in South Africa, in Brazil, really have been transformational. And they quickly were able to add the ring in South Africa and then cabotegravir in Brazil and South Africa. But really for thousands of people, not 1 million people. So we need to also be talking to PEPFAR, Global Fund, and the ministries of health that procure to say, if we get it to $100 a year at launch, where is that $100 million going to come from? Is it going to come out of PrEP programs? Is it going to come out of condom programs? Is it going to come out of treatment programs? And one of the greatest lessons of COVID is that it doesn't have to come out of other programs. Money gets found when there's urgency and when there's advocacy. A lot of the great examples in the chat about what happened under COVID were not because of Gilead and remdesivir. They were because regulatory agencies used emergency use authorizations, not full licenses. It's because governments made millions of dollars available to procure products. So we need that, because $100 million to get 1 million people on LEN at $100 per person per year is not going to happen overnight. And it won't happen because the companies make the product. Someone has to buy it. And Unitaid has an essential role, both as a direct purchaser, but also collaboratively with the Gates Foundation, with SIF, with MedAccess, with PEPFAR and Global Fund. And we need that pooled procurement that says to whether it's Gilead in the next 2 years while generics get to market, and then with hopefully 5, 6, 7 generic companies, we are ready to spend $100 million because we want to end this epidemic. And here's where that money is going to come from. We're doing it collaboratively. If we don't take that big risk and think big, then we are going to have these conversations with every future product, and we're not going to prevent infections.
Thank you so much, Michelle. We're almost at time, but I just wanted to, first of all, thank all of our panelists for your exciting presentation, and it was very informative. And we'll then, as a network, I really want to just extend our thanks to you for coming here and helping us to guide us through this very difficult topic. This is the kind of discussion that our members would like to have, and I extend my gratitude to you. I want to give David Deacon, who has a 30 seconds to just make a quick input regarding Gilead, and then I have an important announcement about our future activities.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. I'm a key advisor to the NGO delegation at UNITAID and collaborated with Brooke recently on a blog we did on Lenacapavir. We don't know why Gilead are doing the bilateral approach. We can speculate, but it's clear they're choosing that versus, as we've heard from Andrew and Brooke, the MPP is like the gold standard approach in terms of breadth and transparency and competition to get the lowest prices. The word on the street is that their financial performance, I'm talking about Gilead, has been poor over the last 5 years. Some of their cancer drugs haven't performed well, and they're looking at Lenacapavir as their next big blockbuster. And so I think this is one of the biggest civil society challenges on advocacy that we've had to face. Because they're going to absolutely maximize shareholder value and profits before people. So we are going to have one hell of a battle ahead of us. And, I just want to say, can we please coordinate our civil society approach to really put the pressure on Gilead, probably starting with asking them, pleading with them to resume negotiations with MPP, not because just we want it, but because it's in their interests, even from a shareholder perspective, to get extensive access across the world as fast as possible. So love this webinar, and I hope we'll have some clear actions coming from it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So again, thanks to everyone for your attention today. In the last minute that I have, I am putting in the chat or post-check survey. We have a survey out. We encourage you to complete it. It helps us to better understand what your needs are, what level of awareness on key topics, so that we can continue to meet to meet them by having these kinds of webinars, and also ensure that the tools that we use in the network for advocacy and for learning are fit for purpose. And I also want to share another two last exciting updates. One is that we will launch our cost of inaction report next week, so please look out for that. And also the UAN will be at the World Health Summit, and I will be sharing with the details of what we'll be doing there and opportunities for you to participate or to in some of the key advocacy moments that we hope to have there. Thank you again. I'm pleased with your attention and that you stick with us for a 90-minute call today. Have a wonderful afternoon, morning, and rest of your day. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel, and everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.